Should you be doing this or this? If you're learning to play piano, you've probably heard about major scales, and you definitely have heard the major scale your whole life because it's used in almost every genre of music. It's the foundation for pieces of classical music, for jazz, and for pop music. There are only 12 major scales on the piano, and there will probably still only be 12 when you die. So it's a great idea to get really comfortable with all 12. The thing is, there are lots of different ways to practice scales, and unless you know what you're trying to get out of your scale practice, it can be tricky to choose the right way to approach them. So in this video, we'll look at 3 main reasons scale practice is so valuable. And then we'll look at specific practice tools to maximize each of those benefits. The first benefit is recognizing shapes. When you become really comfortable with your major scales, you start to be able to see them almost like they're lit up on the piano keyboard. So if I know a piece is in the key of D flat major, I can kind of visualize all these notes that belong in D flat major. And that makes it so much easier to do so many things. It makes it easier to learn new pieces of music in that key, whether or not it's from chord symbols or from sheet music. It makes it easier to learn other kind of theory rudiments that might be based in that key. So any chords belonging to that key, any arpeggios. Once you recognize the shapes of major scales, they become a springboard for so many other theory skills at the piano. And recognizing the shape of a certain key makes it much easier to write music or improvise music that belongs in that key. So for this shape recognizing benefit, we actually don't even have to play the scale from bottom to top or vice versa. We can play the scale out of order. And playing a scale out of order is another name for playing a melody. So typically the first thing I do with students who are new to playing scales in all 12 keys is to play the first part of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and move that around the circle of fifths counterclockwise. What this means in practice is that you'll move to the next key by looking for the 4th note in that scale you just played. And that's your next key. So we just played that part of the melody in C. Let's now play it in F. You notice, in order to preserve the sound of that melody, I had to lower this B to a B flat. And that's the difference between an F major scale and a C major scale. F major has a B flat in it. Now we can move to the next key in the circle of fifths. It happens to be the same note that we just lowered, that B flat. We'll hold on to the B flat. And again, we'll lower the 4th note of the scale. So now we have a B flat and an E flat in the scale, and this is B flat major. You notice, just by playing that melody, we've played the first 6 notes of this major scale. The only note we have left is the last note, the 7th note of the scale, which is always just a half step below the root. I think you'll get the most out of this if you discover your way around the circle of fifths on your own. But in case you get stuck, I do have a PDF guide to these shapes for all 12 major scales, arranged by the order of the circle of fifths. And you can also check out my separate video that just walks you through how to play every single major scale in the order of the circle of fifths. Playing Twinkle in all 12 keys is such a great place to start because most people recognize the sound of this melody so strongly, it's really easy to catch any mistakes, even more easy than it is if you're just playing through the scale from bottom to top. And I like it because it forces you to find those scale degrees out of order. And that actually is better for working out this skill of visualizing the entire shape of the scale, which is what we really care about for these kind of theory-related, learning new songs kind of skills. Okay, once you've done Twinkle around the circle, like I said, you've covered the first 6 notes of every major scale. So you pretty much have learned all of your major scales, but it's always a great step to then go ahead and play the scales from bottom to top in every key around the circle of fifths. That would go like this. There's C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B major, E, A, D, and G. You'd be amazed how many of my students cannot do that easily. And when we work on doing it together, when we start lessons, they're often surprised by just how much of a difference it makes for how easy it is for them to play everything at the piano. If it feels like a tedious exercise to you, you can make it a bit of a game by seeing how long it takes you to get all the way around the circle of fifths. I like to call it closing the circle. Sort of like how on a fitness watch, you're trying to close your circles for the day. Think of it the same way with closing your circle of fifths, playing all of your major scales. And for a lot of people, the first time they try to play through all scales, it might take them more than 10 minutes with a lot of trial and error. But then you can get to where you can do it really fast. And just for a little inspiration, watch how quickly I can play through all 12 major scales if I go straight from one to the next. So there's all 12. Now, it can be helpful to play these scales quickly if you have good fingerings for your right hand. So there are 2 rules you need to know for the left side of the circle of fifths and the right side of the circle of fifths. For all the flat keys on the left side, you'll put finger 1, that's your thumb, on C and F. That's true for every flat key. So if we take A flat, for example, our finger 1 ends up on C and on F. Meanwhile, for the sharp keys on the right side of the circle of fifths, the finger numbers are always the same. You start on finger 1, and then you cross after finger 3. So for example, on A major, start on finger 1, cross after finger 3. And that's true for every sharp key. Like I say, it's amazing how many people can't actually easily play through all 12 major scales. So first, just focus on getting those 1-octave scales. But if you get comfy with that and you want some bonus exercises to help you get even better at recognizing these shapes, you can go on to 2-octave scales. You can also chunk the thumb groups. So for example, with D major, I can see where the thumb crossings are. There's a group of 3 fingers here, then I cross my thumb, here's a group of 4 fingers, cross my thumb, here's a group of 3, and a group of 4, and that continues for however many octaves you play the scale. And so I can group those and play them in one group, 3 plus 4 plus 3 plus 4. And that's a helpful way to visualize the whole scale and move through it really quickly up and down the piano. So that's thumb group chunking. You can also do this fun exercise called scale mush. The idea here is just that you put your hands down on the piano and try to play only notes that belong to the scale you're working on. So let's say again that it's D major. I could put my hands down like this, and I'm trying to only play notes that belong to D major. And then you can go to another key. Let's say it's A flat major. I'm just putting my hands down and playing only notes that belong in that key. That's a much more advanced exercise, so I'd mostly suggest that for someone who's a jazz improviser aiming to become even more fluent with the shapes of these scales. So that's it for shape recognition. Now let's move on to the second major benefit, which is ear training. Ear training is an amazing skill for amateur musicians. There are a few things that are more fun than being able to hear a recording and figure out on your own what's going on in the recording. And ear training is also an absolutely essential skill if you want to do anything in the professional music world, because there is just an expectation that you're going to be able to receive a piece of recorded music and figure out everything that's going on. So for most people, if you don't have perfect pitch, The road to training your ear so that you can do that, get any piece of recorded music and figure out everything that's happening, is to become really comfortable with recognizing where things are in relation to the key of the song. For a demonstration of this, consider that melody to Twinkle. I can play it in a different key and still recognize it as the same melody. And that's because our ears actually care more about where these notes are in the scale than where they are on the instrument. We care that this is 1 1 5 5 6 6 5 4 4 3 3 2 2 1, more so than we care that this is G flat, D flat, E flat, and so on. So whether you know it or not, you have been hearing in terms of scale degrees, in terms of numbered notes of the scale for your entire life. And really the job of training your ear is connecting that sound with a number. You're connecting the sound of bum 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 with 1 1 5 5. And there are a lot of things that you can do to develop your ear in this way. My single favorite exercise for this might be a little bit counterintuitive. It is transposing simple melodies. So much like we did with the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, playing it around the circle of fifths and playing it in all 12 keys, you can do this with any simple melody. And drilling this is really, really good for your ear. Even though it's very physical, and it might not even seem like you're having to work on your ear as you do this, it is a tactile way of connecting a number with a sound. So let's use Have You Met the Muffin Man for an example. Okay, this melody actually starts on 5, so it's 5 1 1 2 3 1 1. If you put this melody in every key over and over again, you are having to think of that first melody note in your head as 5 and then hear it in the new key. Okay, that's 5 1 1 2 3 1 1. And I continue to do that in lots of different keys. And I'm really drilling in this sense that this is 5 in the key of D flat. And that's how 5 sounds. 5 1 1. I will say that for me, this is the single exercise that made the biggest impact on my ear. And I was kind of surprised to discover it happening. But when I started transposing a lot of simple melodies through all 12 keys, there was this sense of a knitting together of my ear with my understanding of scales and scale degrees. And suddenly I was able to find melodies by ear on the first try, where before I did that, it was typically a process of trial and error. So that's my suggestion for something that you can do if you really want to focus on the ear training benefit of becoming comfortable with your major scales. Transpose simple melodies through all 12 keys. And some great starting suggestions are Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, Hot Cross Buns is even easier, Have You Met the Muffin Man, Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round. These are my favorites. And if you're not a fan of nursery rhymes, you can also usually use the melodies to pop songs. All right, benefit number 3 is developing your technique. And it's not an accident that I put this last, because for most of my students anyway, people who are interested in writing music, learning popular music, learning jazz and improvisation, technique is not the limiting factor in their playing. And rather than make them drill scales mindlessly for no reason, I more use technique practice with scales as a kind of remedial tool. If there's some problem that's coming up in folks' technique, then we'll address it using a scale. Because scales are an amazing way to work on technique. They remove all the other variables we're usually dealing with, and they create this really pure blank slate where you can drill in new technical tools. So a deep dive into classical piano technique is beyond the scope of this video, and I myself am not primarily a classical pianist in my background. I did study classical music as a child, and I took lessons with a classical teacher while I was doing my undergrad at USC, but it's not my specialty by any means. I definitely recommend tone-based videos also on YouTube. for classical piano technique. I'm always amazed by their videos, and I always feel like I learned something. But to briefly touch on how you would practice scales if you're really trying to develop your technique, a great way to do this is with 4-octave scales, hands together, and you're listening for a really clear, connected legato sound. That means an even, smooth connection between the notes. So that might sound something like this. And I love doing this in a key like D flat because it fits the hand so well. Now, I know that my classical teacher at USC would have all sorts of problems with what I just did. It's definitely a little challenging on this keyboard as opposed to an acoustic piano. But I can tell you, the things that I'm listening for are to try to connect and get a really even sound between the hands. And what's great about listening for those aural cues is that they help you use the passive weight of your arm to get a sound out of the piano instead of using these more active pushing motions. What we want is to be able to drop the weight of our arm down into the piano and just transfer that weight through the bridge of our hand. So there's no real way to play a disconnected scale if you're truly using that kind of arm weight, because when you're using that kind of arm weight, you're passing off the weight of your arm from one finger to the next. And if you hear a little air gap in there, right, a missing connection, that means that you've lifted up the weight of your arm. So our goal is to drop the weight of our arms into the key bed and leave it down. And again, this kind of real technique work, I only suggest usually for more advanced students, or if you're feeling like you're really being limited in the flashy things that you want to play, not so much by finding where those notes are on the piano, but by how quickly your fingers are able to move. And if that's the position you are in, which really is not that many piano students, but if that's the position you are in, you're in a great place to start using the metronome and gradually speeding up these 4-octave two-handed scales. So that's it for this overview on scale practice. As you can see, there's so many different things you can get out of scales, and therefore lots of different ways to practice them. To leave you with one final piece of inspiration, most of the great musicians I know have spent some period in their lives kind of obsessed with scales. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you if you don't start out that way. Most people start out feeling like, well, maybe scales are a little bit of a drag. It's like eating my vegetables or something. But the reason that I think great musicians often get really excited about scales is because you start to recognize these benefits that you get from scale practice. And it can be such an enjoyable, meditative way to connect with your instrument. So give it a chance, and as you start seeing the rewards, it's possible that you'll get a little bit obsessed with scale practice too. Remember to subscribe for more piano instruction. My name is Ted. Happy practicing.